So there I was, Captain Luna Voss, sitting in what could generously be called a waiting room, if waiting rooms were designed by sadistic interior decorators with a fetish for sterile white walls and uncomfortable chairs that seemed specifically engineered to make humans squirm. The Galactic Council had summoned me for what they delicately termed a remedial intelligence assessment. Because apparently, according to their infinite wisdom, humans were too stupid to be allowed to roam free in civilized galactic society. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been public enemy number one, the infamous human war criminal who'd supposedly committed unspeakable atrocities against 3 different alien species. Now I was sitting here like a remedial student waiting to prove I could count to 10 without using my fingers. Chancellor Blixmort, a pretentious blob of purple jelly with more credentials than brain cells, had oozed into the room carrying a tablet that probably cost more than Earth's entire defense budget. His translator box crackled to life with that insufferable bureaucratic tone that somehow managed to sound condescending in every known language. "Captain Voss," he gurgled, "the Galactic Educational Assessment Committee has determined that your species demonstrates concerning cognitive deficiencies that may render you unsuitable for autonomous civilization status." I leaned back in my torture device of a chair and smiled. "Let me get this straight. You're giving me an intelligence test because you think humans are too dumb to be trusted with sharp objects and fire?" "The assessment will determine your species' cognitive baseline," Blixmort continued, apparently immune to sarcasm. "Failure to demonstrate minimum intellectual competency will result in permanent educational containment pending further remedial instruction." Educational containment. That was a fancy way of saying prison for the intellectually challenged. I had to admire their commitment to euphemisms. "And if I pass this little pop quiz?" "Provisional acceptance into Galactic Academic Society with appropriate supervision." More prison, just with better lighting and probably marginally less torture. The Galactic Council really knew how to sell a deal. "Well then," I said, cracking my knuckles in a gesture that made 3 security guards reach for their weapons, "when do we start this intellectual pissing contest? I've got a dinner reservation on Proxima Station I'd hate to miss." The truth was, I didn't have any dinner plans. I just enjoyed watching aliens panic when humans acted unpredictably, which according to their files was approximately 97% of the time. Blixmort's gelatinous form quivered with what I assumed was either excitement or digestive distress. "The examination will commence in 30 minutes. I trust you understand the gravity of this assessment, Captain Voss." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied. "You've decided that the species that went from hitting rocks together to splitting atoms in about 10,000 years might be a little slow on the uptake. Makes perfect sense." As Blixmort oozed away to presumably brief his team of academic executioners, I couldn't help but chuckle. These aliens had spent months studying human military tactics, psychological profiles, and strategic capabilities. They'd analyzed every battle I'd ever fought, every decision I'd ever made, and every life I'd ever saved or taken. And somehow, they'd reached the conclusion that the problem was our intelligence. This was going to be more fun than I'd anticipated. The examination chamber looked like something designed by committee. If that committee consisted entirely of beings who'd never seen a human and had only vague descriptions to work with. The ceiling was uncomfortably low, the lighting was the wrong spectrum, and the chair was clearly meant for something with a fundamentally different skeletal structure. But the real entertainment was meeting my fellow test subjects. Professor Tentacula swept into the room with the kind of dramatic flair that only comes from having 8 independently functioning brains. She was a cephaloid from the Andromeda sector, and each of her tentacles ended in what looked like a miniature head, complete with beady little eyes that all focused on me with obvious disdain. "So this is the human specimen," she announced, her voice a harmonious chorus of condescension. "I must confess I expected something more impressive. Your species' reputation for unpredictability led me to assume you'd at least be visually intimidating." I smiled pleasantly. "Sorry to disappoint. We save the intimidation for special occasions." Next came Quantum Mind Zeta 9, who wasn't so much a being as a floating geometric construct that pulsed with mathematical equations. Literally. Numbers and formulas cascaded across its crystalline surface, like a screensaver designed by someone with a serious calculus fetish. Human cognitive architecture detected, it announced in a voice that sounded like a calculator having an existential crisis. Probability of meaningful performance, 0.0001%. Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence, I muttered. But the crown jewel of alien arrogance had to be Chancellor Pombottom, whose name was either a cruel joke by his parents or a testament to his species' complete lack of self-awareness. He was what the diplomatic files politely called an aristocratic gas bag, which was literally accurate since his entire body was a floating balloon filled with various noble gases. His voice boomed from speakers mounted around his inflated form. "I do hope this won't take long," he wheezed. "I have a lecture to deliver at the Rigel Institute on the intellectual limitations of carbon-based life forms. I'd hate to be late because I was watching a human struggle with basic arithmetic." The examination room itself was a masterpiece of paranoid engineering. Force fields hummed at various intervals, clearly designed to contain something far more dangerous than a middle-aged human woman in a military uniform. Security cameras tracked my every movement, and I counted at least 6 different types of restraint systems built into what they generously called furniture. "Expecting trouble?" I asked the nearest camera. Blixmort's voice oozed from hidden speakers, standard precautions for containing potentially volatile subjects. "Volatile? Me?" I placed a hand over my heart in mock offense. "Chancellor, you wound me. I'm just here for your little intelligence test." Professor Tentacula's 8 brains all focused on me simultaneously. The human displays typical primitive humor responses. Note the inappropriate emotional reactions to serious academic assessment. Quantum mind Zeta 9 pulsed with what I assumed was agreement. Confirmed. Human behavioral patterns indicate insufficient comprehension of situation gravity. I looked around the room at my competitors, these supposed intellectual giants of the galaxy, and couldn't help but grin. They'd spent so much time studying human military records and tactical analyses that they'd completely missed the most important detail about our species. We don't just think outside the box. We forget the box exists entirely. "Well then," I announced to the room, "shall we get this academic beatdown started? I'm curious to see what you consider challenging for a primitive human brain." The silence that followed was almost worth the trip. The first section of the exam materialized on holographic displays that surrounded each test station. I had to admit, the technology was impressive, even if the content was insulting. Section 1, Blixmort announced with ceremonial gravity, mathematical reasoning and logical problem solving. "You have 1 standard galactic hour." I glanced at the first question and nearly laughed out loud. It was asking me to calculate the orbital mechanics for a 3-body system, the kind of problem that supposedly required advanced computational assistance for lesser species to solve. Professor Tentacula was already at work, her 8 brains coordinating in what looked like a complex dance of intellectual showboating. Tentacles waved through holographic equations while she muttered calculations in at least 4 different languages. Quantum Mind Zeta 9 had turned into a light show, mathematical formulae cascading across its surface faster than a slot machine paying out jackpots. Numbers flowed like digital waterfalls, while it processed calculations with mechanical precision. Chancellor Pombottom inflated slightly as he concentrated, his gas-filled form bobbing gently while he dictated answers to his personal AI assistant. And there I was, human fingers dancing across the interface, solving problems at a pace that was apparently causing some concern among the monitoring staff. "Impossible," I heard someone whisper from the observation booth. "The human is completing calculations without any computational aids." The second problem involved quantum probability matrices, the kind of theoretical mathematics that supposedly required years of study to understand. I finished it in 3 minutes and moved on to the next question, which dealt with 11-dimensional geometric proofs. By the time I was halfway through the exam, the whispers from the observation booth had turned into outright concern. "Chancellor Blixmort." A technician's voice crackled over the intercom. "The human's response time is unusual." I looked up from question 47, a delightfully complex puzzle involving the interaction of gravity waves with quantum foam, and noticed that my fellow test-takers were starting to show signs of strain. Professor Tentacula's 8 brains were no longer working in harmony. 2 of her tentacles were arguing with each other over calculation methods, while a third appeared to be having some sort of mathematical breakdown. Quantum Mind Zeta-9's light show was becoming increasingly erratic, with error messages beginning to flash among the equations. Apparently, even living calculators could overheat when pushed beyond their limits. Chancellor Pompbottom was deflating slightly, his confident wheeze replaced by what sounded suspiciously like mathematical hyperventilation. Meanwhile, I was treating their supposedly impossible exam like a pleasant mental warm-up. The kind of problems that human school children might struggle with, but nothing that would challenge someone who'd spent years calculating trajectory patterns while under enemy fire. Question 68, I announced to no one in particular, asks me to determine the optimal resource allocation for a multi-planet logistics network during wartime conditions. I paused for effect. Should I mention that I've actually done this? Or would that be considered cheating? The silence from the observation booth was deafening. By the time the hour was up, I'd completed the entire section with 23 minutes to spare. My fellow academics were in various states of intellectual distress, while I was sitting back in my uncomfortable chair, whistling a tune from old Earth. Well, I announced cheerfully, that was refreshing. What's next? Advanced finger painting? Interpretive dance theory? The looks on their faces were almost worth the 6 months I'd spent in their detention facilities. Section 2 arrived with considerably less fanfare than the first. The holographic displays flickered to life, and I immediately knew something had changed. These weren't math problems or logic puzzles. These were case studies. Military scenarios, to be precise. Tactical situations, strategic dilemmas, and ethical decision trees that looked suspiciously familiar. In fact, they looked like situations I'd actually lived through. Section 2, Blixmort announced, his voice noticeably less confident than before. Applied strategic analysis and decision-making theory. The first scenario popped up, a colony world under siege, limited resources, civilian population at risk, enemy forces with superior numbers and technology. Multiple choice answers ranging from negotiate immediate surrender to fight to the last defender. I stared at the screen for a moment, memories flooding back. Kepler 442 billion. 3 years ago. 40,000 colonists, mostly families who'd never seen combat. The hegemony fleet had arrived with enough firepower to glass the entire continent. But there was a fifth option buried in the choices, one that wasn't immediately obvious: tactical retreat with strategic misdirection. That's what I'd actually done. Evacuated the civilians through mining tunnels while broadcasting fake surrender negotiations to buy time, then used the colony's industrial mining charges to create an artificial asteroid field that trapped the hegemony fleet in a debris amaze. The Galactic Council had called it a war crime because I'd destroyed valuable infrastructure and endangered civilian mining operations. They'd failed to mention that it had saved 40,000 lives. I selected my answer and moved to the next scenario. Then the next. Each one was a situation I'd faced, a decision I'd made, a victory they'd rebranded as atrocity. Professor Tentacula was struggling visibly now, her 8 brains trying to process strategic concepts that apparently weren't covered in standard cephaloid military doctrine. She kept muttering about illogical human decision matrices and impossibly variable behavioral patterns. Quantum Mind Zeta-9 was faring even worse. Its crystalline surface was flashing error codes as it tried to calculate optimal solutions for scenarios that didn't fit standard military algorithms. Problems designed by humans couldn't be solved with purely computational approaches. Chancellor Pompbottom had given up all pretense of intellectual superiority and was frantically consulting reference materials, his inflated form bobbing with increasing agitation. The scenarios kept coming. The defense of New Geneva, where I'd used the enemy's own communication protocols against them. The evacuation of Tau Ceti Station, where I'd convinced 3 different alien species to cooperate by making them believe they were competing against each other. The liberation of the Centauri mining collective, where I'd ended a war by getting both sides drunk on human alcohol and locked in a room until they worked out their differences. Each victory had been recorded in their files as evidence of human irrationality, unpredictability, and dangerous strategic thinking. They weren't wrong about the last part. But as I worked through their carefully compiled case studies, I began to understand what this exam really was. It wasn't testing my intelligence. It was testing their ability to understand human strategic thinking. They'd spent months analyzing every move I'd ever made, every decision that had saved lives or ended conflicts. They'd brought in their best minds, their most advanced computational systems, their greatest strategic thinkers. And they still couldn't figure out how humans actually thought. The final question in the section wasn't multiple choice. It was an essay prompt. Explain the strategic value of seemingly irrational human decision-making in complex conflict scenarios. I looked up at the observation booth, then directly into the nearest camera, and smiled. You really want to know? I stood up from my examination station, which immediately triggered about 17 different alarms and caused the security systems to go into full containment mode. Force fields snapped into place. Emergency lights bathed the room in angry red, and I could hear the distinctive whine of weapons powering up. Relax, I called out to the observation booth. I'm not escaping. I'm giving a practical demonstration. Blixmort's voice crackled over the intercom with barely contained panic. Captain Voss, return to your station immediately. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, I continued, ignoring the command. You've got all this fancy security, all these precautions, all these protocols, but you're still thinking like machines, not like humans. Professor Tentacula's 8 brains were all focused on me with what I assumed was a mixture of fascination and terror. The human is exhibiting classic aberrant behavioral patterns. No, I corrected. I'm exhibiting classic human problem-solving techniques, which, if you'd actually understood any of those case studies, you'd realize is the point. Quantum mind Zeta 9 pulsed with agitated calculations. Current behavior does not match predicted parameters. Nothing humans do matches your predicted parameters, I explained patiently. That's what makes us dangerous. Not our intelligence, not our technology, not our military superiority. It's the fact that we consistently do things that make no sense to anyone else. I gestured to the examination room around us. Take this whole setup. You've designed the perfect containment system for a logical, predictable opponent. Force fields, security cameras, automated defenses. All very impressive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a simple rubber ball I'd been carrying since my detention. The kind of thing that wouldn't register on any security scan as a weapon. But here's what you didn't consider. I bounced the ball off the wall at a specific angle. It ricocheted off 3 surfaces, hit a control panel, and caused one of the force field generators to short out in a shower of sparks. The security system, designed by logical minds for logical threats, immediately began a diagnostic routine to determine what had gone wrong. While it was distracted, I walked through the gap in the containment field. The Kepler 442 billion situation, I continued, as alarms continued wailing around us. Your analysis concluded that my strategy was irrationally risky and tactically unsound. But you missed the key factor. I held up the rubber ball. Humans don't just think outside the box. We refuse to acknowledge that boxes exist. Every solution you can calculate, we've already considered and discarded in favor of something that shouldn't work but does. Chancellor Pompbottom was inflating and deflating rapidly, which I assumed was the aristocratic gas bag equivalent of hyperventilation. This is preposterous. Intelligence cannot be measured by chaos. Intelligence? I laughed. You still think this is about intelligence? You've been studying human military tactics for months, analyzing every decision, every strategy, every victory. And you still haven't figured out the most basic truth about our species. I tossed the rubber ball to quantum mind Zeta 9, who failed to catch it because, as a geometric construct, it didn't have hands. The ball bounced off its crystalline surface and rolled across the floor. We're not the smartest species in the galaxy, I continued. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most technologically advanced. But we're the most adaptable, the most unpredictable, and the most willing to try solutions that make absolutely no logical sense. The examination room's security system finally finished its diagnostic and discovered that it had been defeated by a children's toy in basic geometry. "The question you should have been asking," I said, looking directly into the main observation camera, "isn't how intelligent are humans. The question you should have been asking is how do we coexist with a species that considers impossible solutions to be the starting point for problem solving?" I smiled and sat back down in my examination chair. "So to answer your original question about how many should I let live?" I paused for effect. "That depends. How many of you are smart enough to stop treating humans like a problem to be solved and start treating us like a force of nature to be respected?" The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in months. 3 hours later, I was sitting in what the Galactic Council euphemistically called a debriefing session, but which looked suspiciously like a tribunal. The same sterile white room, the same uncomfortable chairs, but now with the added bonus of 12 different species of bureaucrats all trying to look like they hadn't just had their fundamental understanding of the universe challenged by a fake human with a rubber ball. Blixmort had managed to regain some of his composure, though his purple gelatinous form still quivered with what I assumed was either indignation or existential dread. "Captain Voss," he began, consulting a tablet that probably contained my revised psychological profile, "the results of your examination have been illuminating." "I'll bet they have," I replied cheerfully. "Learn anything interesting?" "Your mathematical and logical reasoning scores were off the charts," Chancellor Blixmort continued, apparently choosing to ignore my sarcasm. "Your strategic analysis demonstrated capabilities that our best computational systems couldn't match. And your practical demonstration," added a new voice, belonging to Admiral Zrekthal of the Security Council, "caused 17 separate departments to request immediate updates to their threat assessment protocols." I nodded approvingly. "Efficiency. I like that." Professor Tentacula, looking significantly less confident than she had 6 hours earlier, leaned forward with all 8 of her heads. "The question remains, what do we do with this information?" "Well," I said, leaning back in my chair, "you have a few options. Option 1, you can continue treating humans like we're some kind of cosmic accident that needs to be contained and studied." The uncomfortable shifting around the room suggested this option was losing popularity rapidly. Option 2, you can accept that humans are part of the galactic community, and maybe, just maybe, we might have something to contribute besides chaos and confusion. More shifting, but this time it seemed more thoughtful than uncomfortable. Or option 3, I continued, you can offer me that academic position you mentioned and let me teach a few courses on applied human strategic thinking and why your security systems don't work. A practical guide. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before Admiral Zrekthal spoke up. "What would you want to teach?" I pretended to consider the question seriously. "Oh, the usual. Military history, tactical analysis, creative problem solving, advanced rubber ball dynamics. Maybe a seminar on how to win wars with things you found in your pocket." "And in exchange?" "Humans get full citizenship rights in the Galactic Council. Our ships get unrestricted travel permits. And you stop referring to us as potentially volatile specimens in your official documentation." "That's all?" I smiled. "Oh, and I want my war crimes charges officially reclassified as tactical victories achieved through unconventional means. It's better for my academic resume." 3 days later, I was standing in front of my first class at the Galactic Defense Academy, looking out at a lecture hall filled with the best military minds from 47 different species. They were all staring at me with the kind of respectful terror, usually reserved for natural disasters or tax auditors. "Welcome to Military Strategy 101, I announced, pulling out my trusty rubber ball. "Today we're going to discuss why the most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't a photon torpedo or a plasma cannon." I bounced the ball once, caught it and grinned. It's a human who's been told something is impossible. The note-taking that followed was frantic enough to power a small space station. Somewhere in the back of the room, I spotted Quantum Mind Zeta 9, its crystalline surface flickering with what I'd learned to recognize as the computational equivalent of frantic scribbling. The universe had spent millennia trying to figure out humanity. They'd analyzed our biology, our psychology, our history, and our technology. They'd calculated our capabilities, predicted our behaviors, and planned for every possible contingency. They'd done everything except ask the simplest question. What if the crazy species that split atoms for fun and colonized hostile planets as a hobby actually knew what they were doing? As it turned out, we did. We just did it in ways that made absolutely no sense to anyone else. And honestly, that was exactly how we liked it.